All right.
Anyway, I just went through.
So while you're working on that, we'll go around and introduce ourselves. We're starting. So we usually start by introducing everybody in the room. So I'll start. I'm Commissioner Karen Valenzuela.
Sandra Romero, Commissioner.
Kelly Wolf, Commissioner.
Let's go back there.
Technical support, Lisa. And Greg.
All right, let's come back to the table over here.
Crop County Manager.
Robin Campbell, the county budget manager.
How about our camera person? What's your name?
Walt Jorgensen, camera person.
Okay. Janet, why don't we start with you down there?
Janet Jordan.
Zena Harton.
Tris Carlson.
Jerry Parker.
Jim Lockmeyer, Water Resources.
Cliff Moore, Thurston County Resource Stewardship.
Anybody else back there? Hello. We missed your name?
Lynn Holz.
Thank you.
Greg, I think he's
Thank you. All right, how about the back row? Who's in our back row?
Rick Walk, City Lacey Community Development.
Thank you.
Doug Christensen, Lacey Water Resources.
Great.
Scott Clark, Thurston County Planning.
All right.
Bob
Did
Jacobs.
Did we get Bob? Hello, Bob.
Hi,
Bob Jacobs.
Bob Jacobs, interested citizen.
I think we're
I could think of
in
another
Tom.
word, but.
Okay, be a minute. That's okay.
Top is located as part of the presentation.
Oh,
These 2 days are well.
Spot we can see right here.
I want the best seat now, so if I can get it. Go, Tommy.
I sit and have to have my view off to the side for 5 minutes, and it starts getting to my neck. Is it really? Yeah.
That's not good.
Okay, and
Certainly, movie theater seats can be
The projector.
So go ahead and just go forward one. And it takes a little bit of time. There. So,
Okay, got it. See the mic here and the mic around?
I don't know if they have a microphone for you or not.
I don't know. Do we have a microphone?
Yeah, we do.
Yeah, and that would probably be great for Tom.
you can check the batteries in. Oops.
We're meeting, so these seats are available.
That's the one that goes to short.
Let's leave. There was saying that many.
All right, are you ready? All right, go ahead.
Okay, what I'm going to be describing today is a different protocol for development. Right now, the county uses the 2005 drainage manual for its standard, and buried within that drainage manual is the flow duration. Gotta say that slow, Bob says, flow duration standard. And effectively, the flow duration standard, I'm saying, is the 0, 100, 100 standard. And I'll be referring to that nomenclature several times, so I'll take a second to describe it. The 0 applies to the amount of forest that the protocol requires. For this case, the Department of Ecology standard requires no forest. The second one refers to the total amount of impervious area that is allowed by the standard, and the Department of Ecology standard allows 100% hardened surface. And the last 100 is the easy way to say it is the amount, the volume of discharge allowed from the site. And in this case, it's 100% of rainfall. So let's back up for a second. A perfect watershed in terms of salmon and habitat is 100-0-0, completely forested, no impervious, no runoff. So the Department of Ecology standard is just the inverse of that. There's really no chance of saving streams and consequently Puget Sound if we hang on to the standard. Okay, that's pretty much what I'm going to say for the whole hour, so if you've heard it, probably leave now.
Well, can't.
And I hope nobody does. Okay, the Washington Pollution Control Hearing Board, a little bit of history here, ruled that the Phase 1 permit, which was before 2008 when they did this hearing, based on the flow duration standard, the Phase 1 permit fails to meet MEP, maximum extent practicable, and ACART. Both of those terms are jargon under the Clean Water Act, the Federal Clean Water Act 1972 as amended, and so this is federal. The Pollution Control Hearing Board has said that the standard the Department of Ecology is using is not adequate, and they sent the Department of Ecology back to the drawing board to come up with something else. After a full year, they've come up with just about exactly the same protocol as they lost the court case with. So we're all shrugging our shoulders, wondering what's the story with that. The other thing that the board decision ruled was that the flow control standard, the primary method that DOE uses, fails to meet MEP and ACART. So they specifically mentioned the flow duration standard or the flow control standard. So right now we are sitting with the Pollution Control Hearing Board telling Department of Ecology that the standard isn't adequate, and the next proposal, at least the draft that they've got going so far, is that they're going to use the same protocol. Okay, go figure. Pre-development runoff. All flow duration or peak flow discharge standards going back at least 20 years. I'm only 30 years old, so that's as far back as I can remember. That's a joke. Yeah, I've got to convince her. Oh, you're a sweetheart. So the going back at least 20 years, it's based on peak flow or pre-development runoff. First it was the rational method, Q equals CIA, and then the Wyranen and Lauren based on the rational, and then the SCS method, then the modified SCS method, and now the Department of Ecology has got a model which develops what? Pre-development runoff. There is no such thing as pre-development runoff, and you're all hanging on the edge of your seat. We'll go to the next slide and begin discussing that. Here in the, well, not quite primeval forest, it's probably second growth, but it's mature second growth forest. The average rainfall in the Puget Sound is about 40 inches. Of that 40 inches, maybe half of it never effectively hits the ground. half of it is evapotranspired or is intercepted directly by the leaves and needles of the vegetation. So the other half does hit the ground, trickles through all of these leaves, and finally gets down to the ground, doesn't get evapotranspired by the roots, pulled up by the roots. And how much of that 50% of annual precipitation runs off as overland flow? None, zip. Especially up here, high in the watershed. Watershed is not a totally homogeneous thing. Some places some things happen, and other places other things happen. But up here, where most of the development is going to go, there is no pre-development runoff. And to convince you of that, I have some charts here. These are done by the University of Washington. I got them from Kim Stevens, who I think nicked them off of the University of Washington. And the top one is natural conditions, pre-development. The first thing you want to look at is pre-development overland flow runoff is less than 1%. I can't quite read that, but my memory says that that's what it says. So about half of it gets evapotranspired, as I said. Oh, thanks. Wondered why I'm here. Half gets evapotranspired. Another 10% goes to deep groundwater, and about 45% flows as shallow groundwater, interflow. After suburban development, there are other kinds of development which would have different fractions, but in this case, you can see that evapotranspiration is down by 15%. So what's the big deal? 15%, that doesn't sound like so much. Well, that is a lot. It's enough to ruin your watershed. You get 35% as interflow, and still 10% going to deep groundwater, and surface flow has gone from a whopping close to 0 up to 25%. That's enormous. That is clearly enough to destroy your watershed, and I'll be going through the science on that in a minute. The other interesting thing here is, I said a moment ago that a watershed is not a homogeneous thing. Most of this 1% runoff occurs right here in the riparian zone. There's a saturated zone that surrounds a stream, so any rainfall that lands on the stream itself or in that saturated zone looks like impervious surface. It looks like immediate runoff. But up here in the forested condition, as I said before, there is no runoff. So if you're trying to match pre-development runoff, it's going to be 0 in most cases. So the science. There are two bodies of science which tell us, which guide us on how to, on what a healthy watershed is, and by inference, what characteristics you would have to maintain if you want to maintain a healthy watershed after development. So the stream health, which is characterized by benthic index of biotic integrity. Everybody says IBI, and all the people who deal with this on a daily basis recognize IBI instantly. And the other branch of science is channel morphology, or channel stability. And the guiding metric there is hydrology, flow, return frequency of flow, to be exact. So here's the index of biotic integrity, IBI data. This is a famous slide now. Probably everybody in the business has seen it multiple times. It's from Chris May's doctoral thesis, 1996. It charts total impervious area of a watershed as a percent against IBI. No big surprises here. The more impervious area you have, the more unhealthy the stream gets. This being a healthy stream and this being a very sick stream at an IBI of 10. The surprise here is in this oval is that half, just about half of your IBI, the health of your stream, disappears in the first 5% of additional total impervious area in a watershed. Okay, so if 5% causes a loss of half of the health of your stream, what should you be aiming for in terms of effective impervious or the impervious area that leads to runoff? I claim it's 0. Why would you want to lose half of the health of your stream? The good news is that it's really not that hard to reach 0 effective impervious area, or the impervious area that discharges to a stream. Really not that hard if you do the other thing, which is preserve forest. The other metric here in red squares, in case anybody notices, is the coho to cutthroat ratio. Fisheries people have found that when the water quality and stream morphology gets bad, that ratio declines. That there are more, I guess that means more cutthroat than coho. The more your stream is degraded. And that's interesting because it seems to be a much more consistent metric even than IBI. This is another way to say that. This is a slide or a graph by Aquaterra, and it charts where the water goes for different land use types. Forest over here, total impervious over there, like industrial, and then all land use types between. And on this chart, the red is bad. Okay, that's surface runoff. The more surface runoff you have, the more evil you have. And the interesting thing to me on this slide is everybody knows that when you reach total impervious area, your goose is cooked. The watershed is done. But what's interesting to me is that between these two land use types, forest and pasture, the metrics change almost imperceptibly. The interflow goes down a little bit, the evapotranspiration goes down a little bit, and interflow goes up a little bit, and surface overland flow changes not at all, or imperceptibly small. But in this land use type change right here, you can destroy your watershed. So if you can lose your watershed just with this change, it hardly pays to talk about what goes on over there. So, and this of course is where all the conversation goes on now with the flow duration standard. So Booth, who has done the majority of science related to the flow duration, or I should say the flow frequency, and the impacts of changing hydrology on streams, stream morphology. He has found that after 20 years of empirical data, that the model changes in flow regime corresponds to a loss of about 1/3 of the forest cover. He's saying that streams begin to destabilize after you lose 1/3 of the forest cover in a watershed. And a similar degree of observed damage is about 10% effective impervious. You remember from the previous slide that 5% was enough to cause serious decline in the IBI. So here's 1/2 the puzzle. I think I might have another slide by Booth here. Oops. Go in the right direction. Yeah, almost without exception, the same observed transition for stable to unstable channels was marked by the equality of 10-year forested and the 2-year urbanized discharge. Okay, it took me a long time to study that to understand what Booth was saying here, but the chart on the next slide might help. He's saying that if the forested 100-year discharge in the stream begins to return every 2 years instead of every 100 years, the stream's getting flashier, in other words. More impervious area, less forest cover, stream gets flashy, and when you get down to the point right here where the 10-year forested and I said 100, didn't I? The 10-year forested and the 2-year current discharge are equal, which is to say the ratio is 1 to 1. That's the point at which streams begin to destabilize. And he says, here's the data. Generally unstable streams below that ratio and generally stable streams above it. And he adds that this point occurs when the watershed is about 1/3 logged. Okay, so now we've talked about IBI. Health of a stream is bad after 5% impervious cover. And Booth says that after development, that you can expect stream channels to destabilize after 1/3 of the watershed is logged. Okay, what happens if you exceed those parameters? Well, very quickly, you can get landslides. Stillman Creek does not have 1 square foot of impervious area, but still, an extreme storm event caused a huge landslide. Debris flows, incision of the stream channel. This stream channel, I'm guessing, is down about 8 feet. Used to be up right around here. It drains an urbanized area. I think this is in Gig Harbor. And it incised 8 feet over some time frame after development. After it incises, it is not very high quality salmon habitat. Sediment discharge. So we could go on with a long list, but the time is short. There are very bad impacts from bad design, from high impact development, which is to say lots of impervious area and not much forest left. Okay, bad design. Let's take a quick look at what I think is quite bad design and tell you why. Okay, this is a subdivision, really hard to find, right? Just drive around almost any place in the 3 jurisdictions and stop your car, and this is what it looks like. So what's wrong with it? Well, for one thing, water is trapped behind cliffs, so it cannot get to vegetation. Cliffs are only about 6 inches high, those curves, but that's sufficient. Means that all the water that falls on that road goes down to the catch basin, from the catch basin into Chambers Creek. High impact, high impervious area. Driveways all slope toward the road. Every drop of rain that falls on the driveway, down to the road, down to the catch basin, into Chambers Creek. Okay, downspouts. Downspouts hit a splash block, go into the driveway, into the street, and you got the drill, into Chambers Creek. So every square foot of impervious area in this subdivision drains to Chambers Creek. This subdivision alone would register on the IBI chart. And of course, Chambers Creek is filled with subdivisions like this, and so Chambers Creek is hard hit. By the way, this is at peak traffic. There's a car there. So one wonders, when you have a peak traffic flow of one vehicle on the road at a time, why does it have to be 30 feet across? Those are one of those imponderables. So 6510-0 is the standard that falls out of Booth's work and May's work. 6510-0 instead of 0-100-100, which is the flow duration standard recommended or about to be recommended by DOE. What is it? Well, 65% forest remains after development. That kind of lines up with Booth's declaration that if you log a third of the watershed, you're right down on the brink of stream destabilization. 10% max TIA and 0 effective TIA, or 0 runoff. So this is hard to meet? No, I claim that it's not hard to meet, and in fact we've done it. So what else is 6510-0? What else would you have to put into the standard? Well, you have to talk about stream buffers. That's our critical area ordinance. Those are beginning to look pretty good, actually. Road crossings, you want a few of them. Why? Effective impervious area. It drains the runoff down to the stream. And selective logging clearing practices. This is something that nobody has talked about. They say you ought to save 30% of the forest, or 35%, or 65% of the forest, but patch cuts. You know, if you go into a watershed and log a great huge patch cut of equal to 35%, then you are going to have a huge impact. The selective logging practices distribute the impact across the entire watershed. So those are the parameters you have to meet, and I claim they can be met. So can it be done? A big surprise here. I think it can be done. Why am I so certain that it can be done? Well, because we've done it. Every aspect of urban development, roads, parking lots, sidewalks, housing development, every aspect of urban development, you can find an example somewhere where we've already met the standard. And I'm just going to go through a few examples here. C Street, when they finished that project, in the right-of-way, they had 65% rain garden, which is, I'm calling recovering forest, and 35% impervious area. The impervious area is all isolated, which is to say it does not drain directly to a catch basin. For the something like 500-year event that they had a few years after this project was completed, they had no runoff from this roadway. Zip. And before the project, they had runoff for every drop of rain that fell. An Eco Stone Road in Pennsylvania, same protocol here. I think you find no runoff for any event for this road. This looks like just a beautiful little country lane. Unfortunately, it's a Photoshop job. So, full disclosure here. But the road itself, the only thing that was photoshopped was this grass strip. The road is that wide. In reality, it's barely 9 feet or 10 feet across, but it's a two-way road. It's in Beaux Arts in Bellevue. And and this little strip of road, they don't have any runoff. We've done it before. Full disclosure again, this is another Photoshop job. But what I tried to show is that the original pervious pavement here is bridge decking, huge openings, and just those thin steel strips for support. Well, suppose you combine those steel strips and use the California strip model here for heavy wearing space for the traffic. The only thing that this is missing on an existing state highway is the grass under the impervious, or under the bridge decking, the original pervious pavement. So I claim again, we've already done it. The only thing that's missing is the rain garden. A zero runoff interstate highway. It's up high enough such that vegetation grows under it. Its footprint is very close to zero. Public transportation. Have we ever done zero impact or zero runoff public transportation models? Well, yeah, we started in 1825 with the first monorail, very small footprint. In Europe, I think this is Germany, we've got a model which is pretty close. You can see that the impervious area in the right-of-way is the width of the rail, 4 rails, that's 12 inches of impervious area in the entire road right-of-way. I think you got the idea here that we could probably do it. Another monorail, this one in Germany, with a totally forested floor space under the supports for the monorail. Driveways, have we ever done it before? Yep, here's a brick one, no runoff from this driveway. This one's made out of a product called turf stone, no runoff from that one. Another turf stone apron for a garage, never seen any runoff, doesn't rain much in Carmel. Okay, how about housing? One of the criticisms that I've heard probably most often is that, Tom, get a life here. You cannot meet the Growth Management Act criteria with this standard. What you're going to get is sprawl that goes all the way to Clayellum if we adopt this standard. So I have put together, compiled a few slides where in fact we've been achieved some density, or we could achieve density using that vertical direction basically for getting your density. So 3 to 4 units per acre. Here's one right here in Olympia. It's surrounded by rain gardens. These have all grown up since this slide. Rain garden here, rain garden there, rain garden there, and all the pavement is pervious. And since 2005, when this was completed, there has been no runoff. Easily get 3 or 4 of these per acre. Another one that could easily be built, this one on stilts, again, vegetation under it, the footprint is close to zero. This one's in Beaux Arts, surrounded by native vegetation, easy for the native vegetation to absorb the impact of that small footprint. How about 10 units per acre? Let's raise the bar here a little bit. This looks like 2 Seattle bungalows, but in fact, those are 2 condominium units with 5 units each. You put this on a 1 acre forested site, and you've met the standard, and you've got 10 units per acre. Interesting that the driveway that leads to the garage that's under both of those units is shared, and you've just about minimized impervious area as much as you can. This is on a 40-foot lot. I think you could, I did some math, and I think you could get 10 of these cottages on an acre and meet the standard. Same thing in Langley. These are small cottages, they sell very well. I can tell a story on you here. The developers started selling these out at something like $180 or $200 a square foot, and he sold so many the first day he bumped the price up to $375 a square foot and sold all the rest of them shortly thereafter. So the developer that comes up to me and says, I can't make money doing this protocol, I have to show him this slide. and chuckle. 15 units per acre. Okay, the bar is going up. Row houses will give you 15 units per acre. On each side of the row, you have a forested, or in this case, a rain garden strip that absorbs the impact. And if you did the math, the ratio of the roof and driveway and sidewalk area with the pervious rain garden area works out about 2 to 1, which is what? 65, 35. I'm about ready to change that slide with a pointer. Queen of England lives in multifamily housing. I just threw this in as kind of a marketing slide. The other thing I hear about multifamily living is that, you know, it's for poor people and down and out and low income. And I'm saying, well, duh, not here, not everywhere. In some places, multifamily living is a very exclusive and toning upscale way to live. We don't have to build that way. 50 units per acre. How do we do that, Tom? Well, Methuen came up with an idea here for an urban farm. I thought it was so good that I nicked it from them. I think I did some calculations here they didn't say, but I think there's about 150 units in this. You can see that it's terraced. There's a chicken farm down here on the first floor, and there are garden plots for every unit above. The high-rise design uses 1.35 acres, so even though the farm itself is almost invisible hydrologically, suppose you did the math and you said I need 2.7 acres to make the ratio come out right. We'll put it on 3 acres to allow for driveways, and you've got just about 50 units per acre. 200 units per acre. Oh, Tom, you're trying to bust the Growth Management Act here. Growth Management Act says 4. What does 200 units per acre look like? Well, you have to go high. But if you put the Sears Tower on 10 acres of forest, you've got 200 units per acre. So the point here I'm belaboring with a purpose is that the Growth Management Act is not at odds, not at loggerheads, not in disagreement with the standard. We can meet the standard regardless of the density that you specify. So with that, I would be happy to answer questions for 5 minutes left.
Thank you, Tom. Questions?
Just a comment, pretty fascinating stuff. This is the first time I've heard this presentation, I've heard about it, but I'm pretty impressed.
Oh, really? Oh, good. Well,
Yeah.
Go ahead, Zena.
Tom, you don't address a couple of issues about pervious pavement, you know, that I believe that the developers are going to tell you it's too expensive a prospect, and also that it will not maintain itself without a fair amount of work to make sure it remains pervious over time, because it's going to get duff and things. How do you respond to them about that? And then I have another question.
yeah, well, I half agree with them. Pervious pavement is more difficult to maintain. You have to vacuum it. You have to keep the pores clean. You know, probably every 4 to 5 years, you have to hit it with a pretty powerful vacuum to unclog it. On the other hand, there are other models of impervious surfaces. How am I going to say this right? Pervious pavement that would require very little maintenance. And I'm thinking of California strips with rain gardens beside them, like that state highway that I showed you, the bridge. Very little maintenance for that. So there are ways around it. The other point, expense. Okay, let's calculate the cost of recovering Puget Sound if we do it the wrong way and put that on the balance sheet. So far, Chesapeake Bay in the last 10 years has spent $8 billion, and the Chesapeake Bay has gotten worse. So let's figure somewhere on the order of $1 billion a year if we do this the wrong way, and compare that with the extra $1 a square foot for impervious pavement. Pervious pavement. I'll get that right. Yeah, it doesn't compare. It's much cheaper if you add in the presently external costs of building the wrong way. No comparison. It's just dead simple, cheaper to build low impact. Yeah, your other question.
Well, I've just been part of a field trip up to the Center for Urban Waters in Theophos Waterway, Tacoma, and they have the what I consider to be cutting edge approach to dealing with urban water. And they're using large cisterns where they're gathering water off the roofs, and instead of letting it flow anywhere, they maintain it in cisterns that they've used a simple filter so that now they have essentially clean water, and they're using it to flush the toilets in the building. And you didn't mention anything about cisterns.
Yeah, if I had an hour, I would have. Cisterns are a great way to make a roof invisible hydrologically. If you can use half or more of the annual runoff domestically at either, well, probably internally, which is to say inside the house, goes into a storm sewer, or I should say into a sanitary sewer and off the lot, then you've subtracted the extra interflow you would have added. Yeah, cisterns are a 5,000-year-old best management practice. I agree with that. Jerry?
I just want to clarify, I hadn't understood that you were an advocate for rain gardens. In that case, we have something in common. It's a tough slog, though, I can tell you, trying to work with the city here to promote the idea. There's a whole lot of skepticism, but I'm glad you're on the side. But I had thought from previous discussions that you were a skeptic on rain gardens and believed that forest in its classic sense was the appropriate cover. Can you clarify or comment?
Well, forest still is the best. I mean, all the soils and the vegetation is intact, and all the microbes and all the, help me out here, Mary, Harry, mitochondria, all of the stuff that causes symbiotic relationship and for the soil and the plants and this is intact in a forest. But sometimes for lots of good practical reasons you can't do a forest. You can't save it, or you end up having to replant it. If you're going to replant it, then a rain garden is the first step. I call a rain garden a recovering forest. And for sure, it's a tool in a tool bag, and we have to use it.
But having lived in Ken Lake, which is was once pretty heavy forest and still has a lot of forest, people there are quite anxious to cut down the trees every chance they get. When we had the storm 10 years ago, 18 log trucks came out of there. I would suspect that in the development patterns you show there, people are not going to be willing to live where a 200-foot Douglas fir can crash down on them.
Yeah, that's a good point, and that would make me nervous too. And I don't think that the argument or the discussion, is a better way to say it, is over about the best vegetation to have in an urban setting. I think where you can put 200-foot tall Doug firs and cedars and other northwest vegetation safely, that's the way to go. but no one has yet told me why a 20 or a 30-foot juniper wouldn't get you almost all the way there. So I think that, you know, I'm not saying that the entire protocol is totally nailed down, but considering the alternative, which is to see continued decline of Puget Sound and watersheds when they're hanging on by the claws now, by their little tiny pectoral fins. We've got to change. I mean, we just got to change. That's all there is to it. Yeah, Zena.
Well, one more question. What we've seen the city of Olympia turn to is very large detention ponds. They're in evidence all over the city of Olympia. Please speak to detention ponds.
Well, ponds are evil. Yeah, they are actually they represent damage to the watershed, not mitigation. And I actually modeled that scenario. I took in my, in my fantasy model situation, I took a 10-acre forest and I put a 1-acre pond in the middle of it and modeled it. And after I got done modeling it, the computer spit out the answer that says, you've damaged the watershed, you need a pond. And so, wait a minute, I've got a pond. That's what caused the damage. I said, well, you may have a pond, but it damaged the forest, you gotta make it deeper. So I made the pond deeper and deeper, and finally it said, okay, you're far enough down into the till that you finally met the criteria of the model and you've totally mitigated the damage. Well, it's nonsense. What you've done is taken down, well, in my case, old growth timber, all that forest understory, and you dug a hole 10 feet down into the till. So you have a totally impervious, effectively impervious area. Nothing will infiltrate there anymore. You've done damage to the forest by building a pond. They need to be outlawed. Absolutely, absolutely should be outlawed. And that's, of course, what the Department of Ecology manual is saying we're going to have to do, more ponds. I've really made a good case here. You're all convinced, right? Yeah, anything else? Bob?
Tom, you made the point that this technique should be applied first to new development, because it's easier there than retrofitting existing development. What I have not yet seen is a kind of a sketch of what would this new development look like in its totality. Let's say, as an example, a town of the size of Tumwater or the size of Yelm, let's say 5,000 or 10,000 people. How would that actually look with the housing, with the shopping centers, with the streets, with job spaces of various kinds, and kind of some detailed description of each of those areas and what their features would be and how that would work? It seems like you and your colleagues have all the information necessary to put that sort of a picture together, to sketch that out and make it real for people. But I don't know that it's been done yet. I think that would be go a long way to selling this concept.
Yeah, absolutely great idea, and I couldn't agree more. All it takes is 5,000 or 10,000, which Puget Sound Partnership spends every 20 minutes, right? Why haven't they created something like this to help sell the concept? That's an imponderable. I have no idea why they haven't expressed an interest in that. Sure, somebody can come up with 5,000 or 10,000. I can put a team together to do this kind of a scenario on paper, on slides. Jerry?
Is there a chance that whoever challenged it to the hearings board previously will challenge the new version again?
Oh,
Who
I'm
brought
very
that?
glad you brought that up.
Who challenged it before?
Well, it was Citizens United Against Everything. I forget their formal title, but they...
Citizens United sounds a little scary.
Yeah, it was King County, and actually, since the the presentation that the commissioner saw last time, I've talked to 3 attorneys about this issue. And all of them said that that the decision was narrow enough that there are ways around it. If you did exactly the same thing as King County, which is to say, make a flat ordinance with no exceptions and applies to everybody, then they're going to be back on your case. But if you find some ways to allow exceptions, like development on outwash soils, can do something, you know, a lot different, because outwash soils drink everything. If you're not in a watershed that with fish-bearing streams, maybe there's an exception. And you also provide a site plan review process which would allow them to get out of the protocol, out of the standard, if they could show the administrator or the hearing examiner that they could do it without harm. So if you built that in to the development regulations, the attorneys I talked to thought that there would be a pretty good chance it would be, excuse the expression, watertight. Yeah, I think it's worth the risk. I think that supposing Thurston County decided to adopt a standard like this, Department of Ecology might then have permission to do the right thing. I don't know why they're so nervous.
But just to be clear, you're saying that it would be watertight, the 65-10-0 would be watertight. I'm wondering if Ecology comes out with the same virtual plan they did before that was taken to the hearing board, will it be taken to the hearing board again? If they
the county
stick with
did
the
a
0,
65
what you call the 0-0-0.
Yeah, well, certainly, I mean, anybody can sue anybody over anything.
Oh,
I guess
right.
what I'm talking about is, would the ordinance survive? And I think that if you did it the way my attorneys have been telling me, that it would survive a court challenge.
So I asked you this once before, for governments updating their critical area ordinance. What about the buffer? What are you thinking?
Buffers. And I guess I have the same answer. The real short answer is I don't know. I'm not an expert on buffers. What I've been told by people who are experts